My experience is that it is a myth that you grow and then you meet your destiny. You bump into your destiny and then you grow or you don't. And if you don't, it tends to unravel and you got to do it again. The problem is that what you want is not yet a part of you. And so when you get it, you are required to do some really rapid growth. Even children, when bones grow, they're painful, growing pains. We have a name for that. I thought I wanted, one of my goals was, I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. I wanted a certain kind of relationship, wonderful and passionate and consistent and with someone brilliant, and really wanted to feel a certain way. Well, when I got it, it was really hard. It was hard because I didn't have the same kind of freedom. I couldn't act out in the same ways. I really had to change a lot, as did he, because we both got what we wanted, but now we had to be the people who could sustain it.
Laura Day, welcome to From Vision to Creation. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me today.
Well, thank you so much.
You've built such a unique career at the intersection of intuition, human behavior, transformation, and practical change. Before we get into your new book, The Prism, your first book in 15 years, I would love to go back to the beginning.
Well, that's so funny you say that, because this was my first book. This is me at 35. And many, many years ago. I'm 67 now. And it really was, it's so funny how things come completely full circle.
Well, I heard you on Oprah's podcast talking about how your friend Demi Moore dragged you to the Oprah show, which
She wrote a forward for this book 35 years ago. I mean, it was really...
That's incredible. And Laura, you really do have such an incredible story, and it totally aligns with the ethos of this show. Having a vision, first of all, but then having the courage and the strength to take it to creation, because people oftentimes don't really talk about the struggle that you have to go through sometimes to make something happen. So where I would like to start, Laura, is what were the early experiences in your life that first shaped the way you understood people, patterns, and intuition?
I'm not sure I had an understanding of intuition, but my early life was very chaotic. I'm pretty much the sole survivor of my family. My siblings have suicided, except for one. Two have suicided, my mother, my uncle. And we had a lot of upheaval in our childhood, and it was odd because it wasn't typical of, my father was a doctor. It wasn't typical of our milieu. For me, the saving grace, the reason that I'm here to tell the tale was not really courage. I don't know that I think I'm a fairly fearful person and hypervigilant person, actually. But first of all, we all have something. And I have, severe ADD. So I have a very mobile attention. I also was the oldest. So that attention, that intuition got engaged because I was living alone at 5.5 a lot of the time with 3 younger children. So my intuition, the great thing about intuition, I always say it's an idiot's gift. Intuition will get you information about what you need. So I was fortunate in being the oldest, so that intuition was really targeted toward how do we survive. And I tell people it's not, people think intuitives are wise, and that's so not true. Intuitives are like someone else driving your car. But when somebody else is asking you a question, it makes sense to them. But for me, I was really lucky in that I had somebody else driving my car a lot of the time. And then when I got old enough to begin to build a life, I synchronistically saw a program that researched brains like mine on extrasensory perception, and I became part of these varied experiments, some ridiculous, some incredible at university level. Um, and because I liked it, and I also wanted to know, first of all, it was the only thing special at that time. I'm a math and science nerd. I went to a school called Stuyvesant for high school in New York. Um, and I had no idea what I was really going to do with my life because I don't have the kind of memory that makes for a great mathematician or a great physician. ADD doesn't lend itself to retaining knowledge. But what I did have were goals because survival, people underestimate need. And when you have need, although you miss certain other developmental things that you have to catch up on in the remedial class when you're an adult, when you have need, you have a target for your intellect, for your intuition, and for your actions. So I had need, and my brain allowed me to do it. Like my brother had need and his brilliance. He was, brilliant mathematician. His brilliance allowed him to do it. And I really tell people your pathology can become your potential, and actually it has to become your potential because you need to use all of you.
I love that, Laura. And one thing that I'm finding really inspiring about your story is that you mentioned that several people in your life, in your family, suicided. That is such a difficult thing to go through. And yet, here you are telling your story and helping people through your story. What was it in you, Laura, that made it possible for you to continue on your path despite these adversities?
I think we all have adversities. One of the most profound pieces of wisdom I got from a dying woman. I was hospitalized for a few days. I was 19, nothing serious. And the woman in the same room, there were two people in a room, and the woman in the same room had tubes coming out of her. She was clearly, dying. And I was crying because I was just uncomfortable. It was my first time in a hospital. And then I saw her and I said, I'm so sorry. Like, I have nothing to cry about. And I'm really sorry that I'm disturbing you and that I'm being pathetic. And she was amazing. She patted her bed. And I mean, she literally had just tubes and IVs and monitors. And I went over and I sat on her bed, which was already a comfort. This is like 2 o'clock in the morning, which in a hospital means nothing because they come in at all hours. And she looked to me and she said, honey, everyone's pain hurts the same. And for some people, being afraid of the dark is as traumatic as my childhood was for me. It really, I think, often depends on how you're wired and on, those things like birth order and how your adaptations are matched to your life and how quickly you learn to match them. And I mean, one of the reasons I wrote the Prism was that we all have places where we compensate. So I was, at 5, I was an incredible intuitive, although I didn't know what that was, and I didn't know anything was different, except my mother was manic depressive, and you had to remind her to put on clothes before going outside the house. But I didn't really think, oh, wow, I'm intuitive. I used what I had, and I think that that's what we have unlearned how to do. I mean, if you look at our, probably not your parents' generation, but my parents' generation, there were world wars, there were all kinds of things going on. And it really, I think that we have been taught now that we need an expert for everything, but we actually have access to that. And a community forms an expert. All of those individual facets of a prism of a community, a structure of a community, uh, forms those. But of course, nobody makes money off community. So it's hard to market community. And we're taught, you need this, you need that, you need this gadget, you need this specialist, you need this good, you need to walk outside with a goal or with a sense of where you're hurting or where you have something to offer, literally where in your physique you want to expand, and just talk to somebody, be part of life. That's what changes you.
I love that, and I could not agree more. And I love the title of your book, The Prism, which is such a great read. I highly encourage everyone, if you haven't read this yet, you need to. I'm going to include the link in the episode notes. Um, Laura, for people that are looking at the cover of your book for the first time and they see the prism, what is the prism?
So when I was a young intuitive, and that was over 40 years ago, I used to tease because, of course, I came to intuition through science, and that mysticism. 20-year-olds are, well, at least I was a snotty 20-year-old. So I was like, oh my God, the granola eating, the earth shoes, the yoga, the chakras. Oh my God. I was very, I didn't, it was a little redolent of crazy for me. I just didn't want any of it. And I was, snotty kid. Well, lo and behold, in my 50s, I realized that we are actually these amazing machines, and we create the world around us through how we're built. Because, you take 10 people, they're all living in a different world, even if they're living in the same building. So it's our genetics, it's our experience in those first 7 years before you can say, hey, this is BS. I'm not buying this. I'm the responsible one. Who said that? I'm not the smart one. Really? Excuse me? So we get formed, and then that's all we see in the world. And there's a myth, and that myth is that the answer is inside. It's not inside. The answer is an interaction. If it were inside and you could find it, you wouldn't be asking the question. So the prism, your ego, yourself, is actually made up of those energy centers in the body that project reality into the world. I actually wanted to call it human architecture. My publisher did not agree with that, because it is really how we're built builds our world. And the good news about that is a tiny change changes everything. We don't have to make these massive changes. It's, wearing a different color for the first time. The world reacts differently. And I actually wrote an article about that. So that is what the prism is. It's interesting. I love the name of From Vision to Creation, because I think people get stuck in vision. They get stuck in thinking. They get stuck even in understanding. It has to feel right. No, actually, it doesn't. It is important to find people who have done it, whether it's through self-help or a therapist or YouTubes or going to a community, a meeting of people who are doing what you want to do. There's so many free events. You don't have to wait for an invitation. And copying, making a tiny change. Oh, wow, this person who has love in their life does this, or this person who has the business I want in the way I want it does this. I don't have to understand it all. Let me do a tiny thing. And I want to give an example. I assume everyone's telepathic. I forget that everyone doesn't have exactly the brain I have. So everyone is telepathic, but everyone doesn't know it. I have a really good friend in LA, and I stay at his house, and he's so warm. So there are always, so many people at his house. And before this book tour, so over a year ago, I walk into the kitchen and he goes, couldn't you at least pretend to be friendly? I'm like, what do you mean? Like, all your friends call me for advice. I'm so friendly. He goes, no, actually, you're nice. You walk in and you don't say hello to anyone, and you're not friendly. And I'm like, oh, wait a sec. I assume we're all communicating. Could you give me a list of what being friendly looks like? And he's a top agent. If anyone knows how to make people get along, it's this man. He actually took the time to give me a list from everything from voice tone to body language to what you do when you walk in a room. If I tell you, I did one thing on that list and it completely changed my life. And that one thing was when I walk into an environment, I notice who's there and I take a moment to smile or make contact with each person. I don't just assume they're reading my energy as I'm reading theirs. Totally changed how people experience me, the world around me, because now people are so warm to me and inclusive and compensate for my shortcomings in a way that they didn't before because I appeared standoffish, so people didn't want to disturb. It changed my work. It changed my relationship. It changed my friendships. It changed it changed everything. And it, I could have gotten stuck in what do you mean or da 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 or the 12 things he gave me. I didn't. I picked one. So we need to be creators, and creating often is just remembering to say hello or asking for what you need. You know, it's so funny how we're all so secretive about two things: what we need and what we have to share. And we're secretive about what we have to share because we don't want to be braggarts, but brag, it's an offer. And we're secretive about what we need because we experience it as so vulnerable. But actually studies show that if you start off an interaction by asking for help of some kind, the interaction, you're more likely to get a big yes, to get a helpful interaction.
I really appreciate your saying about, loving the title From Vision to Creation. And I agree with you. I think that people get stuck in the vision side because when you look up how to do something, you can almost always find a checklist, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. However, because we all are so unique, and that's why I love the title Prism, we all have very unique perspectives and skill sets, shortcomings, etc. That getting through a list from step 1 to 5 doesn't always look the same for every single person just because of how your mind works. So the goal of this show is to talk to people and hear how they navigated their life, how they had to change their perspectives in order to accomplish what they did, because I feel like that is the missing piece, the human part in taking a vision all the way to creation.
So one of the great things about intuition, one of the great things about the Prism is that the practical steps often other people will do for you. Like when the Prism starts with have goals, because resources are zooming by you all the time. And if you don't know what you need, if you don't have a goal, then it's hard to say, oh, wait, I need that. Let me grab that. Let me slow that one down. And actually it does, when you make one tiny shift, you really do put yourself in a whole different world. And then it's uncanny how the elements of creation come in. I think part of the problem is, A, we think we're doing something new and we're not. So we really do need to be copycats. We need a catalyst. And B, we don't always recognize our opportunities because we don't have receptors for them. And, I think that it's so important to be in discussion and conversation, to ask people, what do I do habitually? So my husband pointed out that my first reaction to any adventure, whether it's going to a movie, dinner out, a trip, is no. As he pointed out, most women would love, I'm going to take you away for a weekend, pack a bag. I'm like, no. I need 4 months to prepare. I need to know exactly where we're going. I need the map. And I really have made him my yes guide. Like my new rule is, unless it's dangerous, I'm really making an effort to say yes. And just that has changed my life. I mean, it's made me a little tired, to be honest, but it has completely, little tiny um, changes. And I think that part of the problem is we think we already have to be something to become what we want to be. If you're not starting at you, just realistic you, it doesn't mean you can't have game. It doesn't mean everyone needs to know your vulnerable parts. But if you can't just start with, here's where I am now. I haven't become this or done this yet. And the tools are there. And perseverance is really, discipline and perseverance are highly underrated, because when you create, when you do something new, the first thing that usually happens is you get a little mud on your face, or at least on your shoe. And you gotta, get up and do something else. Find someone else who knows how to do it. Copy them. It really is helpful. And I think, of course, I said yes to things when I was young, and my career developed around it because of need and desperation. I mean, I literally just, I had no choice. But it's nice. I wrote a book called Welcome to Your Crisis. And really the book is how do you move crisis into creation? But the real moral of the story is don't let it get to crisis. You don't need the cortisol. It'll, don't let it get there. And the way you don't let it get there is by creating in this moment. People say, well, I don't know what to do. I'm like, are your dishes done? No. Well, go do your dishes. Like, do what's in front of you. Take the next step. And if you keep taking the next step, and some of them will be missteps, you're going to find yourself at the destination. And the destination is going to be better than you imagined, because you can only imagine from your have not, from your history, or someone else's picture, which isn't going to feel like yours until you've tried little pieces of it. It is always better. And it is always different. And it always takes adjustment. And part of the idea of the prism is, you can get what you want first by making a tiny change. And then, of course, not so easy, because you got to, all that old baggage is not going to fit through the new door. Then you deal with yourself. But I find that often creation comes first, evolution comes later, and then you really understand your vision.
Wow. And you just said several things that blew me away. And I want to touch on one first. You were talking about how people, being where you are and acknowledging that in order to get to where you want to go and be the person that you want to be. One thing that I found is that oftentimes people will imagine what they want out of life or what they think they want out of life, and then they'll compare this successful image of themselves in the future with who they are now, and then feel less than when being compared to this vision. And I think that you're absolutely right. The missing piece here is you have to do, and then eventually you will get there. But if you're not able to be where you are at that exact moment and really acknowledge that, it makes the gap between who you are today and who you want to be in the future seem like an enormous chasm.
Absolutely. And by the way, I do that all the time. I'm a perfectionist. I wake up in the morning, I beat myself up, and then I make the shift, But I think that one of the most important things to remember, just because I think when it's tangible, you get it, is that if you have a pretend hammer, you can't bang in a real nail. Fantasy reality give fantasy results. Whereas even if you're not enough, I'm not enough for a lot of the things I want to do. And I need to deal with that reality so I can get the tools to be enough. And I think that, again, there's a lot, in the Prism, there's something at the second ego center, which is about how do we create abundance? How do we really create abundance in every area of our life? And the first thing to do is empty the muck out. And there's something called shame and blame pages. Anything in my books has always been, there's always science behind it. So there's a study, which I'll mention afterwards. But when shame or blame comes up, write it down, but then get rid of it. Flush it down the toilet, or if you have, delicate pipes, put in the garbage and take the garbage out. So studies have been done on this. If you don't throw it away, the physical act of throwing it away actually makes it effective. And again, if you go to PubMed or any of these sites, you can look at the studies on this. It's so important to not pretend we're not ashamed, not pretend we don't blame, deal with what is real, and then do the work to make the shift to say, well, I'm not going to be able to do this unless I can do this. And one of my favorite examples is I have worked a lot in Hollywood. And there's always this, the incredible actress who says, no, if I take a job and can actually pay my rent instead of mooching off all my friends, it's going to be a vote of no faith in my career. I'm like, no. Number one, first ego center is we need to have a foundation and deal with reality. So you take a job where someone can cover for you if you have an audition, but not dealing with what is real actually doesn't do results. And the minute they get a job at, Pancake House, they get a part in the show. Because our psyche, and listen, your subconscious is running almost 90% of the show without your conscious mind ever being aware. So the idea of you're thinking through with a nickel on that dollar. So it's really important to skip the understanding and say, okay, I can't pay my rent. That's a reality. What I need is a job. I also want to be an actress or whatever. So I'm going to get a job that is flexible. And if I don't have flexibility right away, I'm going to take what I can get. And then part of that goal is going to be being flexible. We have to start from where we are, or there is no foundation beneath us. But it's interesting how quickly and miraculously things happen when we do make a tiny change starting from where we are. It's also incredible how when you get exactly what you want, how traumatic it can be. Because then, whoa, change is required. And that's a lot. My husband, loves work, and he was a very successful journalist. He wrote for the New Yorker and Vanity Fair. And before he became a screenwriter and TV writer. And then he wanted to have all of this work. Well, guess what? This poor man has all of this work. He works a 7-day week now. Now, he loves it, but he's had to rearrange everything in his life, from eating to sleeping to socializing, around the amount of work he has. And it's a lot. And initially he was just exhausted and a little cranky. But, it's again, you get what you want, and then you got to deal with the fact that you got to leave the baggage outside the door. And that can be quite a challenging process. And often people do show up for your expectations. So, I think that we tend to present ourselves trying to show our worth instead of acknowledging someone who's done it before and saying, I really would like to learn from you.
Talking about getting what it is that you want and then it becoming a scary thing, that's always really fascinated me. And I think it is true. Why do you think that is?
Because when you get, it's my experience is that it is a myth that you grow and then you meet your destiny. You bump into your destiny and then you grow or you don't. And if you don't, it tends to unravel and you got to do it again. The problem is that what you want is not yet a part of you. And so when you get it, you are required to do some really rapid growth. Even children, when bones grow, they're painful growing pains. We have a name for that. And we have, when I thought I wanted, one of my goals was I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. I wanted a certain kind of relationship, wonderful and passionate and consistent and with someone brilliant, and really wanted to feel a certain way. Well, when I got it, it was really hard. It was hard because I didn't have the same kind of freedom. I couldn't act out in the same ways. I really had to change a lot, as did he, because we both got what we wanted, but now we had to be the people who could sustain it. And that, if it's a want, it means it hasn't existed, which is why I tell people, don't do what resonates with you. If it resonates with you, it resonates with the you that doesn't have what you want.
Wow.
Again, find a catalyst and do something that's safe, but doesn't resonate with you. Like being friendly doesn't resonate with me. I am friendly. I show up. I love showing up. I enjoy showing up. I don't enjoy the hi, how are you? Nice weather we're having. But I really understand that people, I now understand, thanks to my friend Kevin, that people read that as a cue. You're welcome here. I'm making contact.
And Laura, how can someone tell the difference between true intuition and fear pretending to be intuition?
First of all, in the moment, you can't tell. One of the ways, I've written 7 books on intuition, and one of the things they all demand you do is document. They put you in situations where your intuition flows through, but then you document it. Because really, you're training yourself to use a different kind of data and apply it in a productive way, which is why I hate readings that are, I see love, I see blue, drink more water. It's like, why? Because you say so? Like, tell me something I can prove, do a timeline, and then maybe I'll listen. So you can't in the moment tell the difference between fear and intuition, but what you can do is begin documenting all of your hits, those things that kind of come in from left field. And I do it by hand. Other people often do it on their voice notes. So that's one way. The other way is if you if your intuition is telling you over and over again that you're going to die in a plane crash, I guarantee you're not going to die in a plane crash. Intuition is actionable, accurate, and it's immediate. So it's not that vague sense. And an example is I'm very cheap with airline tickets. And I'm sure none of you remember these days, but back in the old days where you got a written ticket, they would literally write it out in pen and you would get a copy. And going to Italy, where I had a home and still have a home, I got it when I was 23. I'm 47. I'm 47. I'm 67. Oh, that was interesting. So it cost the same amount to go to Italy when I was in my 20s as it does now. I bought this ticket. I did it. You had to do it at least 2 weeks in advance, or the price was astronomical. I had things to do. I was doing some work. 2 days before, and I lost the ticket. I bought a non-refundable ticket 2 days before. I just, for whatever reason, decided I just didn't feel like doing it. I couldn't get myself to go. The airport I would have been landing in Rome had terrorists shoot a shootout when I would have been landing.
Wow.
And so, intuition isn't a data bank that says, do this, do that, or this, da, 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 da. It does come through as a sense that proves itself later, but it's actionable. If someone's going to leave you, you get married, but you're worried they're going to leave, bring it up now. Get in couples therapy, share your fantasies, whatever it is. Intuition doesn't, if you repress what you can't do anything about. So if you were going to die in the next 10 minutes and you couldn't avoid it, intuition wouldn't let you know. Your subconscious would repress that information. That's also why it's easier to read somebody else than it is yourself. On Instagram at Laura Day Intuit, every day at some point I go on and people tag each other and read each other. And a lot of these people have taken my boot camp. So they are advanced students. They know what they're doing. But the way I send them clients is I see their readings on the lives. But ranked beginners do readings because we all have intuition. And it is uncanny how you see an intuitive it's not vague. It's something you can do something about. It's, the future. I have never experienced a future written in stone. When I read, I make my living by reading for large companies, and I only take 4 at a time because the rest of the time I love to teach, and that's what I do. I do boot camp. I train people to work with clients. I do a lot of free workshops. I do these Instagrams every day where people are reading and learning and using practical intuition and the Prism and all of that. But the reason I love working for companies is if you're wrong, they fire you. So, because people tend to believe, people are very influenced. And their questions are, they're things that prove themselves over time. What a company's going to do, what a product is going to do, where something is geographically. Whereas people, they're, individuals really, there's not a lot of perspective, and you have no perspective when you're reading yourself. So it's really helpful to get intuition from other people. Just like as a healer, they say, healer, heal thyself. No, you're going to avoid what you habitually avoid. That's how your prism is made. And in order to expand that, again, you need a catalyst. A catalyst is a group. That's why I love all of these, group meetings where people come and there's a difficulty. I would prefer if people dealt with a vision, something they wanted to create, because I think your attention goes to the difficulty, it stays on the difficulty. It's not that you don't have to deal with the difficulty, but the difficulty isn't going to take you to the vision. Acknowledging it will, but really, I mean, I wrote a book called The Circle, and it's best in audio, but my goal for it was for it to be, and it's still my goal for that and for the Prism, for it to be like an AA meeting, except we get together and we say, okay, I have decided I'm going to find my life partner. I've decided that I'm going to start a company where I can be paid for what I love to do while staying at home. My goal was to do something where I could be in my home. I have this big loft, so I used to do all my workshops here in my loft. I work by phone.
I remember before I started my business, I told myself, I want to start a business where I can work from anywhere in the world. I have no inventory and it's a business to business business. And that is exactly what ended up happening without I wouldn't even say that I was actively pursuing that, but it kind of just happened. And then I remembered, oh yeah, this is what I wanted.
But you were actively pursuing it because by stating your goal and by having, by being committed to deal with what came up in getting to that goal, because, there are miracles and obstacles and often in equal measure. And I think what people tend to do is the first obstacle, they take it as a sign, they magicalize. People will say, oh, a mirror broke. It's a sign of bad luck. I'm like, can you pay your bills? Do you have love? Are your kids healthy? Do you like your job? Yeah. I said, why is none of that a sign? How is the broken mirror a sign? And every single other thing in your life is not a sign. So the minute you have a goal, the first thing that happens is you meet the obstacle. Everyone's looking for their trauma. You go on Instagram and everyone's dealing with trauma. Go for your goal. Believe you me, your trauma is going to be the first guest at that party. But if you're goal oriented, you don't say that this is not trauma. You say, oh, I need tools because this is between me and my goal, and I'm going toward my goal. And, goals have a lot of ups and downs, and they take time. And believe me, I'm as neurotic as the next person. I often have to go back to my own work because a lot of my work comes through me more than it's a part of me. to go back. This morning I did. I had to go back to my own, notice where my body. It was my fourth ego center, my heart, my telepathy. And I noticed, oh, I was sending some pretty judgy things. And no wonder I felt depressed and miserable. And I did something at the fourth ego center, an action that made a change. And it shifted my entire day. And I think we tend, again, to do the same thing over again. We tend to look for the trauma. We tend to get stuck in the difficulty. There are more groups for adult survivors of than there are for, let's just create a vision board. Those you pay for. There are very few free groups, actually, now that I just thought of this. Very few free groups where you go in and say, you know what, this is my vision. This is the step I took today. Does anyone want to give me feedback? Hello, my name is Laura. Hello, Laura. This is my vision. Let me put it out in the world by saying it to you.
And you just said something very interesting, that when you're pursuing a goal, the first person that you're going to meet at the party is your trauma. Why do you think that is? And how can someone overcome that?
Why I think it is if it's a goal, it means it's something you don't have right now. And if it's something you don't have, it's because of your old pattern, your ego needs to change, your structure. Ego is a good thing. It gets a bad rap, but it's a wonderful thing. It's what it allows us to project and create in the world and interface with all the gifts. So if you don't have it, it's because you weren't given the model when you first created that prism of yours. And in order to create it, we learned to avoid things because they felt risky before age 7. So, I mean, I came from a very dysfunctional family, and being in public felt really risky because of that. It wasn't risky when my first book came out. I said no to all press. I had the only book contract in the industry with a press clause that said I didn't have to do any press. And I had that all the way until The Circle, but The Circle came out on 9/11, 9/10/01. So that tour was not going to happen. But so when you have a goal, you're actually doing something really brave if you keep going toward that goal. You're recreating yourself teeny bit by teeny bit by recreating your life, and all the things you didn't think you could be, do, or have become a part of you. The first time I walked on stage, I had a prayer that I said, whatever power is there, if you're ending the world, say in the next 72 hours, could you please do it before I get on that stage? Amen. I thought, oh my God. I mean, it was so not a part of my prism to be a visible target. And now I love it. Now you ask me to speak at a dog food convention, and there's nothing I love more than teaching and speaking and interfacing and being with people who want to do this work and who are creating their visions in the world. There's nothing I love more. But that was not true 40 years ago.
And how do people overcome that?
More than overcome it, there's the child raising philosophy. I used to say to my son, do you want the carrot or the stick? Because you're about to get the stick. The stick actually is not so effective. Fear really isn't that effective. Carrots are, though. Hunger is so effective. I mean, if you've ever been passionate about someone, oh my God, that drive, so effective. That's why you start with your vision. That's why you start with your goal. That's why you start with one piece of creation that you want. Engaging those animal, delicious pieces of us, flood those other pieces. It doesn't mean they don't exist. I will say honestly, still, 40 odd years later, before I get on stage, I'm both excited and there's that teeny little girl who like didn't have socks in the winter and looked ridiculous in school, but it's small. And so not only do you have to do it, but you have to find someone who knows how to do it. That's why I write self-help, because really, the way that the prism is structured is, first of all, you find where your barrier is on your body, again, those chakras. But then you go to that chapter and you do one daily assertion that feels absurd to you. Like, oh my God, a psychic really did write this book. This is ridiculous. And I do this for myself. I find the one thing that I think, did I write this? Like, I should really like be put in a pound somewhere. You know, like sometimes I don't believe this is for your second ego center, which is abundance. I'm a dynamic work in progress. So what does that look like? If that is something that is just ridiculous, what does that look like? That looks like, oh, I feel like I can't deal with these papers. I'm going to do that right now. I'm a dynamic work in progress. I'm going to go find a YouTube on organization that's not more than 10 minutes so I don't procrastinate. And I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to live this assertion today, not chant it like a mantra. Because by the way, mantras don't work unless they're true, because your subconscious calls bullshit and says, I don't trust you. In fact, I trust you a lot less than I trusted you a few minutes ago. A mantra has to be real. But when you pick something to do and you prove to yourself, wow, I made this little shift and I got all these incredible results that I can prove, then that's amazing. For example, being friendly, doing that one thing, just saying hello to the people in the room. It was so auspicious at the beginning of my tour because people started offering me spaces to speak, spaces to do a reading, to buy bunches of books and share them with their group. Like all of it, your frequency is the frequency of the world you live in. And so your frequency was taught. It's not if bad things happen, it's because you're bad or because that's karmically your path. It's because, perhaps you weren't taught that you are valuable. Perhaps you weren't taught that your truth, people don't have a right to all of it. Perhaps you weren't taught that to use your voice strongly before you had to mitigate it in conversation. And so, what the prism does in a way is says, let's go back. You're your own adult now. Maybe your caretaker has slipped on a few little things. You're your own adult now. Here are some ways to find the power of your voice. Here are some ways to enter into conversation differently with the world. And here are some ways that you're doing it, because these things will happen in the world around you. Again, the subjective doesn't prove much. I feel better. It could be because you got a head injury, or better psych meds. It's that you make a shift and then the world meets you in a different place. And that's how you're engaging your intuition appropriately.
Laura, what is the biggest life lesson you've learned so far?
That control often gets us in trouble. That learning not to trust, but learning to observe what is and grow my ability to accept the people and events around me, how much better that makes me as a person for others and how much easier it makes life for me. That's been my biggest life lesson as an intuitive control freak.
And Laura, where is the best place that people can find you and keep up with all of your work?
So lauraday.com is my website, and LAURADAY. I do so many free events, free Zoom so I can see your faces. I do a live almost every day on Laura Day Intuit. I answer all my own emails, so make them short because people ask such personal things. And really my best teaching, people always say, well, will you do a reading? I accept in boot camp in workshops or on my lives. I don't read civilians. I read my 4 companies. But, my best work are in, I mean, I've written 7 books. That one's upside down. My best, every book, not only is it a workshop, but it takes you from point A to point B. The Prism isn't about, here's a new philosophy, believe it. It's about do this and this will happen. Tiny change, do this and this will happen. And I really encourage people to create. You may not know what you want yet. You may not have the vision yet, but you can deal with what's right in front of you. And that has such power to open up your vision, open up your intuition, and completely change your life.
I'm going to include all of the links to your social media profiles and your website in the episode notes below. So anyone who wants to check your stuff out can easily do that. And Laura, if you could go back in time and offer your younger self one bit of advice specifically tailored to your life's trajectory, what would it be?
It would be, get the hell out of there. It is not your job to save everybody. And in fact, everybody can't be saved. And it's still my hardest lesson. I mean, my husband really pulls me back by the collar and says, this is not your battle.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This was amazing, and I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. I really appreciate your being interested.